And that was my understanding of the gospel. Like, I understood the death of Christ. I understood why he died, and I needed forgiveness for my sins and all that. That was great. But I had no idea about the life of Christ, the resurrection. I didn't know why, like, how to live the Christian life.
Everything you knew about living the Christian life you had wrong? What if all the burdensome rules and regulations that you've been trying to live by were pulling you away from the abundant life that God has in store for you? Today on the All of Life show, we are going to tackle that very thing and discover how it's really something else entirely that perhaps you've been missing out on, and yet it's been right in front of your face. So today on the show, we want to welcome Shawn Reinsel. Shawn is an author. He is a pastor, and he's actually a friend of mine. We've known each other. We've led worship together in Bible college, and we've known each other for well over 24-ish years, I think is coming up, probably right around there.
Yep.
And but we have not actually gotten to speak in a number of years. So it is really good to see your face and to hear your voice. And welcome to the All of Life show, Shawn.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and excited to talk about God's grace.
Yeah. Well, Alycia and I are very excited about this. We have been trying to get our show just back on track again, because we've taken a break from it, a much needed, well-deserved break. But we're like, you know what? I can't shake the feeling that God is calling us to continue this. So it's an honor to have you here with us. And we want to dive right in here and just get to a few things. But first of all, Simple Grace. This is a book that you've written about a subject that it sounds so easy. And everybody who's been in church, everybody who's done anything in ministry is aware of this term. Even people who aren't Christians throw around the word grace, graceful, all that kind of stuff. This is something, though, there's so much more to it, so much to unpack. And I'm so glad that you wrote this. And there's a story behind it. But I want to get to, first of all, tell us a little more about yourself, about your ministry journey, and just how did you end up at this point in your life?
Sure, absolutely. So I got saved at about 12 years old, and then got plugged into a Calvary Chapel, which I was really happy about, which was a great church that was teaching verse by verse, which helped me kind of accelerate my growth, I feel like. And I felt really called to be a pastor right as a young man. So I, got saved, was going to church. And I remember my dad got saved about 6 months after I did, when I was 12. I actually lied about being abducted and by people and the mean streets of Colorado Springs. I kind of joke about, but anyway, I made up this story, and my parents got freaked out because I went into this like drainage culvert that when I was in fourth grade, like just as far as I could go. And I got lost one day after school and didn't get home till like 8 o'clock at night after a school night. So I was just like, had to make up a story. So I made up this story. So my parents freaked out. So I ended up being sent to a Christian school to get me off the mean streets, and they shared the gospel the first day of school, and I got saved. I was like, this is awesome. I'd love to get saved. And so anyway, my parents get saved about 6 months later. My dad, we move up to Greeley, which is a little bit north of Denver. And 5 years later, to help start a church. My dad is a pastor. And so I remember growing up, like all about the word, like studying, listen to Chuck Smith tapes, listen to John Corson tapes, just listening all over as much as I could. Just really obsessed with like learning the word, even as a high schooler, but I didn't know the gospel of grace. I really didn't, because I remember like teaching. I was the de facto youth pastor, even as a high schooler myself, of our little church. And I was teaching like, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. And then I show up so I leave, or I remember one time I was teaching that do this, don't do this. And this young girl, I still remember her name was Mary Davis. And she raised her hand. She said, Shawn, that sounds really good, but how do we do that? And I said, I don't really know, but I think we're just supposed to try as hard as we can. And that was my understanding of the gospel. Like I understood the death of Christ. I understood why he died and I needed forgiveness for my sins and all that. That was great. But I had no idea about the life of Christ, the resurrection. I didn't know why, like how to live the Christian life. So I go to Bible college, about 6 months later, and the first class is Bob Hoekstra teaching Growing in Grace. And the first thing he says is, if you think being a Christian is about how hard you have to try, I have really wonderful news for you. And he went on to explain the new covenant of grace, and it completely transformed my life. The understanding that God was not looking to add rules to my life, but for me to live by humility and faith, and he would give me all that I needed by grace, and that this was much more of a union with Christ than a master-servant relationship, but it was more like a marriage. It just completely changed my life, and I haven't really talked about anything else for the past 25 years.
Wow.
So the story kind of goes on. I go back. It was a youth pastor in Greeley. Then I was a youth pastor in Colorado Springs, and married someone from Bible college. And then it kind of, ministry was just rocking. I felt like everything was going great. I had tons of success, and I go on this mission trip. We had 2 kids already. I go on this mission trip to Peru. I come back and I find out my wife is having an affair, and it's a really brutal situation. And so right then the Lord and I had this little conversation, like before I even spoke with her after I found out, and he's like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I was going to ask you, what am I going to do? And he's like, well, you can get a divorce if that's, what you think. You have biblical grounds for divorce, or, but if you stay, all that you've learned about grace in your head, I will move it down into your heart.
Oh, so good.
For learning how to forgive, learning how to depend on me, to love. And he made me no promises about what would happen. And so that I entered into a phase of about 2 years of great suffering where she did not repent. She would continue going out every night, drinking and having affairs, and was completely unfaithful and unrepentant. And then she got pregnant, and then she tried to have an abortion. And I'm like, please don't have an abortion. Just come back, and we'll take this child and we'll have it as ours, and we'll just restart life. So we actually moved up to Denver. She actually said, yeah, she would do that. So we moved up to Denver, and then we had the kid. He's my third son. He knows the story now. He's 18. So I love him so much. But we moved up to Denver, and then 6 months after that, she did it again. But this time she just left like for good. And so I was basically a single dad with 3 boys at 25 years old, like had to not in ministry anymore, just working a secular job, and that's fine. But I was like, okay, Lord, I emotionally, I was okay. Like he was meeting my needs by grace. He was training me by grace, and I was truly depending on him. And there was sadness, of course, and disappointment, but I just remember feeling okay because of his grace, loved, and that all this suffering had given me access to a part of God that I didn't know before. And it was really amazing. So I actually prayed, Lord, would you just give me a wife? I'm not going to date or anything. And I'd like to already know her, and I'd like her to have gone through similar situations as me. The next morning in my MySpace inbox, I had a message from Dana, who is now my wife. So 9 months later, we got married. She was a single mom with 3 boys. Wow. So we got married with 6 boys under 6, and we were like 27 at the time. So we've been married 15 years, almost 16 years. And our boys have grown up. And so anyway, a little while later, I got hired as a pastor. And then a year after that, in 2013, we were sent out to plant a church in Denver. And then we did that. So we planted White Flag Calvary in Denver and did that for 10 years. We became Surrender Church about 7 years later. And anyway, COVID kind of took, we weren't able to survive COVID with the building and stuff like that. And so then I've always had been kind of playing a role in discipling pastors and sending pastors out. And so, and teaching them about the new covenant the way that I had been taught it by Pastor Bob Hoekstra. And so I decided to kind of see if that's how God wanted to use me. And so I started doing this pastoral training ministry, and that's where I wrote the book. So I spent 18 months writing the book after COVID, and so the book came out in 2023. It's called Simple Grace, and then so now I train pastors in India, Pakistan, Nepal, Uganda, Kenya. This year, I think I've trained over 350 pastors now through the whole New Covenant or Growing in Grace course, or I call it a Simple Grace course. And so that's my story of ministry and how it's gone.
Wow. First of all, I just feel like your heart in that, and knowing like that hurt, and yet seeing how God has taken that and used it. And the fact that you've got all this fruit from what seemed like such a painful time and season, and that God is still, there's fruit being harvested from that. And so I don't want to broad brush paint that like as this, so that makes it all good. But knowing that God is such a good redeemer, that he's so faithful to not diminish the pain, not diminish the suffering, but to use it. So, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I had like Holy Spirit goosebumps the entire time through your story. Just like listening, and then your countenance now. I just want to say something. It's a little off topic, but I just want to encourage you, like, watching the Lord's redemption in your life and the way that you walked through that suffering, and then how he blessed it on the other side, and your faithfulness to your son, your third son. And that is enough to draw someone toward the truth of the gospel. Like, that transformation and redemption in your life draws me toward the gospel even more. And so just thank you for your faithfulness in that story.
Yeah.
And your response to the Holy Spirit as well.
Thank you. Can I tell one quick story?
Yes.
That kind of goes with that. So do you remember my dorm steward? The guy in charge of my room was Tim Chaddock.
Yeah.
At Bible college. Okay. So Tim, we were having like a group like prayer night one night. And so all the guys, we like lay hands on each other and pray for each other. So there's one crazy time, Tim and all the guys were laying hands, and Tim is like praying for me. And he's like, I just bear witness that God has called you to be a pastor. And then he's given me this verse for you. And I was like, oh, like, awesome. It's going to be some verse about great victory, or, I'm going to lead thousands of people to Jesus. And so he quoted 1 Peter 4:1, which says, since you have suffered with Christ in the flesh, since Christ has suffered for us in the flesh, let us arm ourselves with the same mind, for he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. And I was like, that's a really weird verse for God to give you over my life.
Yeah.
But as I went through that story, that verse got, like, that moment and that prayer got kind of stuck on repeat in my head, that this was my opportunity to share in Christ's sufferings and really get to know him. And I have to say that it's worth it. Every amount of suffering is worth knowing Christ. Yeah. As Paul says, knowing Christ is the highest aim and goal for any human being.
Well, I think that sets up so well with your book here and Simple Grace. To ultimately, what we're talking about here is the objective of our faith, and is knowing Christ, just being in him and fellowship with him, and the grace that comes from that. And yet, what I think has happened in a lot of Christendom is churches, pastors, ministries, they get off. Maybe it's just a degree, maybe it's a massive amount, but it ends up being that it's either a works-based righteousness, or they're not really embracing grace. They're embracing the licentiousness ultimately. And it's not that it's keep these in tension. It's that it's a third way, really. It's that grace is that only way of transformation, the only way of salvation, the only way of sanctification, all these things happening in your life. And here I am, I'm talking about your book for you, but, so let's dig into that. I want to talk about like what you kind of hit on it, what inspired the book, and then also more of the concept of grace, and unpack that for us, where we get off on it, where we go to legalism, or where we go to licentiousness.
Yeah. I love training pastors in grace, because they have this internal, like the Holy Spirit bears witness that his grace is true, that it works. And so as I train pastors and anyone or talk about grace, it's like just watching light bulbs go off. It's like I'm working on the outside, but the Spirit is working on the inside. And I rarely have anyone who, after a good, decent study or time together conversation, doesn't agree. Like, grace is the only way. But our logic and our traditions get in the way so much of the way of grace. And so here's how it works. Everyone sees the law and they're like, okay, we need to keep the law. We're supposed to keep the law. I want to keep the law. And I want to be good for my Father. I want to represent his kingdom. Mm-hmm. And so they start aiming for that. It's like they get saved and they slap up a picture of the 10 Commandments on their wall and they're like, I'm going to do my best. And that just leads them straight down a path of a legalism and performance-based relationship. And the way I most like to liken it to is in the prodigal son story, that elder brother who he's like, I want to please my father. I want to do his will. I want to work for him. But what he is missing out is he doesn't actually understand his father at all. He doesn't understand his father's love. His father wants to have parties and rejoice and just live life together. And the elder brother is always out in the fields working to please his father. He misunderstood that his father already loved him, that he didn't have to work for his father. His father was completely, everything his father owned belonged to him. And so when the younger brother comes back being the prodigal son, he's all angry and won't come in, and because he has drifted into this legalistic way of living. And that's what's happened to a lot of the church today. They believe that legalism or performance is how we're measured as Christians, as opposed to faith in Christ, which gives us his righteousness. And so legalism is over here. So you're thinking, man, I need to follow his rules to prove or gain his acceptance. And so certain people respond to that, like you said, with licentiousness, or I make my own rules. I'll live however I want and grace will forgive me. Now, does grace forgive you? 100%. That's true. Yes. Every Christian is forgiven of all their sins. So that part is true. But the licentiousness part, Paul says, should we continue in sin that grace may abound? And he's like, certainly not. You don't understand that you died to sin. And so you're going to be living a licentious life, like sinning as much as you want, but you're not going to be happy. Mm-hmm. So then they say, well, the solution to this licentiousness is more rules. And so you go back and forth on like this pendulum of like, am I legalistic? Is it rules that fix me? Or do I need to be more free and just rely on God's grace to forgive me? And both of them miss the key part about grace, which is up here. Grace is the solution for legalism. It's not rules that gives you righteousness. It's God's grace that he gives it to you for free through a union with Christ and his life living through you. And then secondly, grace is the solution for licentiousness, because grace doesn't just say, do whatever you want. Grace says, I live through you. You present your life to me, and now everything you do is controlled by me. I live through you. It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me, and the life I now live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Paul says we offer ourselves, our members, to him because we already died on the cross with him.
I remember having a conversation with someone in our community group years ago, just in a girls' get-together that we had, and she was really dogmatically fighting for, she said it's 50% grace and 50% law. Mm-hmm. And I was so thrilled in your book when you used the same analogy, the percentages, and you said it's not even 90% grace and 10% law. It is 100% grace. What do you think for the Christian has such a hard time grasping 100% grace?
We have to let go of our pride, thinking that we can accomplish anything. You see, Paul went through the exact same struggle. And he had every right to. He was the best trier in history. You know, he had the best efforts. He had the best pedigree. Growing up as a Pharisee, he knew what he could accomplish according to his efforts, trying to live a self-sourced life. And in Romans 7, he describes the life that he lived. And we're all very familiar with this because it's the struggle that we have, that we want to do something, but we don't do it. And the things we want to do, we don't do because we're doing the things we don't want to do. And this whole struggle, and people think that that's the Christian life.
Yeah, just struggle.
Exactly. That's a phase of the Christian life, but it's only a phase that you have to go through while you still believe you can do it. The moment that you say, you know what, I can do 0% and it has to be God's grace 100%, you are now elevated to where he can live through you, because you surrender that control. So it's not your flesh trying to produce a life that pleases Christ, but your flesh, you realize that your flesh is completely dead. It can't produce spiritual life. So you give yourself completely to Christ like an empty glove. He fills it with his hand and lives your Christian life for you. See, so many people think that God wants you to live the Christian life, and you can't live the Christian life. And so they're like, well, what do I do? And then he says, then our second thought is, well, Jesus, help me live the Christian life. And God's like, no, we're not doing it that way either. I'm not going to help you live the Christian life. He wants us to die, and so that he can live the Christian life for us, through us, as we have completely surrendered to the truth that we have died with him on the cross. We've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer us who live, but Christ lives in us. Basically, we want to do his will. We have everything we need to do his will. It's simply a relational, God, live your life through me. I believe that you have done this. You will do it. And I'm going to step forward in the faith that I can't do it, but you will do it.
What do you say to that person? Like, I've heard pastors, I've heard other Christians, they really do get hung up on the law. Like even sometimes I will get pulled back into that and think, maybe you are right. Maybe I do need to, if I was really a hardcore believer, if I was on fire for Jesus, I would do the works. And I do understand where they're coming from, but it's like they're emphasizing fruit before planting or fruit before root. And so the source seems jacked up, and I sometimes don't know what to say to them. I'm like, do you want to, like, it's Paul, do you want to go back to the law? Is that what you really want? You better live by the whole thing. How do you address that as you speak to those people? I'm sure you encounter often.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the law is perfect and wonderful at doing what it's designed to do. And what it's designed to do, it has a message, which is be holy, be loving, be perfect. And all that is great. Okay. And Jesus says, I didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets. I came to fulfill it. So I never discourage people that wanting to produce fruit is bad. It's good. We all want to produce fruit. Every Christian should live holy. Peter says, be holy, for he is holy. But it's the how question. How are you going to do it? If you're trying, the word try is what I focus on. If you are trying, you're doing it wrong. Now, that doesn't mean you just sit there as a bump on a log, because then people accuse you of being pacifist or quietism or something where you just like, oh, I don't do anything. No, we have a very, very active participation in the new covenant of grace where we dive into the life of Christ. We actively connect with him through humility, saying, God, I need you, and faith, saying, God, I'm going to trust you. And so we end up walking in the Spirit with those two steps. I need you, I trust you, humility and faith. And this will produce fruit, but it's never your job to produce the fruit. So the illustration that I use with most people is this. Imagine you're walking down a road, and on the left side is a factory. And this is what happens when we're trying to produce the Christian life. It's like a factory where, what kind of sounds do you hear in a factory that's trying to produce metal fruit, fake fruit? It's like you got banging and clanging and fire and people's hands getting cut off and screaming and yelling and bosses yelling at their employees. And that's just that's the sense you get. when we're trying to live the Christian life by our flesh, by our efforts, by striving. And then imagine the right side, you have a garden, you got someone's, little, where they're like orchard, where they're growing fruit. And what kind of sounds do you hear there? The tree, you birds tweeting, and you got the wind gently blowing, and none of the trees are freaking out. They're just producing fruit because they're connected with the life, the roots, the tree, they're being watered and fed. And so they're producing fruit because of the relational connection. And so that is, the difference between someone having success and victory and fruitfulness in their Christian life and someone that's trying and striving. You're always going to be burnt out. You're going to be tired, and you're going to be wondering, what can I do to fix this? And that's the solution that Paul comes to at the end of Romans 7, going into Romans 8, is I thank God that I can do nothing, but Christ has done everything for me. And it's through him that I can live the Christian life by grace. Actually, I am just crucified with him, and he lives through me. And so it's this living union with Jesus. And there's so many wonderful authors that have helped me to understand that, and other books and other teachers. So anyway, we can get into all that, but yeah, that's how I kind of try to help people understand the two paths that you can walk as a Christian, one of self-sufficiency or one of humble dependence upon Jesus and his grace.
Shawn, I feel compelled to ask you, how do people get out of, if they have found themselves in one of these things, and maybe they aren't even aware, but what are some examples of works-based righteousness that people as Christians get sucked into? Maybe even so-called Christian ministry things that they're swirling around in, and maybe not finding the freedom that they think they were supposed to be receiving.
It's almost like our culture is helping people to trust in themselves. It's like the first thing you hear when you're in kindergarten is you can do it. And then, everything is like reinforced. And as you grow up as an American, it's like our belt buckles say, I can do it. I'm an American. Like, watch me roar. Like, it's just this self-made culture that we have kind of bred in our society. And so it's through being broken of our self-confidence and self-trust that there is freedom. And so God gets everybody there. All of his children get to this point where they realize that they're not doing it. They're not getting it, that this ain't it. Right. And so usually they get to this crisis that God brings them to, where they're like, I'm done with church. I'm done with maybe my marriage, or I'm done with parenting. I don't know what the actual situation and trial is that gets you there, but God always has something to bring you to the end of your self trust. And when people get to that moment, it's like there is a moment where they can hear the gospel and hear this message that it's okay. You were never designed to live the Christian life by trying. This has always been a done deal. This has always been supposed to be by grace and grace alone. And here is the path to freedom. Let go and surrender control and trust in his faithfulness. And it's like people have to be at that moment of crisis. Some people, they just get it right away. When they get saved, it's like, I already know I can't produce life. And they get this union with Christ. Other people need, like Paul, to go through a Romans 7 before they can get to Romans chapter 8, where they discover that Jesus has always been faithful. So many people, they're praying that God would do something more for me. Like maybe God will, I just begging God to set me free from pornography or from this sin or from that sin. And why is God not doing anything for me? And what they're missing in that is what God has already done is sufficient. That he doesn't have to do anything new for them, that they have been completely set free, but they're choosing not to access the grace that he's given because of pride, self-sufficiency. And so the reason why you're not seeing victory, the reason why you continue to fall in sin, why I continue to fall in sin for many years, is because I concealed my sin. I hid from the grace of God because of pride. Just like Moses, I put a veil over my face and I couldn't see the finished work of Christ and how he had already delivered me. And so now so what that did is it filled my heart up with shame, because the enemy is certainly willing to fill up your heart with shame when you're struggling with sin. And I couldn't hear God's voice that he loved me so much because I was struggling with sin and I was thinking that he needed to love me more. And I didn't realize how much he already loved me. And I was just struggling with all this. And so I finally, when you empty your heart of all these idols and all this shame and all this unbelief and the lies that the enemy puts into our hearts, he's so willing to pour it into our hearts. And we just access it usually through our phone. And once I just poured all that out and said, God, this is what I've been believing. He filled up my heart with love, his love for me. And then I'm able to walk in complete freedom and victory. And it's like the union with Christ is so beautiful and powerful. There's nothing else needed.
Can I ask, the story that you told earlier about your first wife and walking through that suffering, how did that play out for you when you are the one, because this is not going to come out perfectly put together because I'm verbally processing as I go, but people say in Christian circles, just give me grace, just give me grace. But what they mean is, just let me hang on to my sin a little longer. And
they're more saying mercy than overlook this. Don't.
Yes. Right. When in actuality, it is God's grace that reveals that sin and brings it to the light. That is his grace on you. And as Christian brothers and sisters, part of giving grace is not allowing things to be covered up under the rug or not allowing things to be hidden in the darkness. So for you and your story, with your first wife, how were you able to give her grace and yourself grace and the people around you, who I'm sure you had a lot of voices in your ear over that time? Like, what did that look like for you?
Grace is not just permission to slide. Grace is the power to live a godly life. It's the power to love unlovable people. It's the power to pour out yourself in love as Jesus pours out himself for you continually. Grace describes the relationship where Jesus pours into me and I pour out him to others. So sin just gets in the way of that. So why would I respond then with impatience or unkindness or unforgiveness when he is pouring into me all these things? So what it practically looked like is I would die, man. Every night I would have my Bible. Actually, it was this Bible right here. Where's it at? Well, it's on this shelf somewhere. I have this old King James Bible that I used in Bible college. And so that was the Bible I was using right there. And I would open the Psalms and I would just cry. I would literally just read it and weep and like tears stained it. So I was going to show you the Bible because the pages are all thick, and they're thick and like bulgy because of tears during those few months. And I would just pour out and I would let him know how I felt. And then through that time, he would share with me that he understood how I felt. And we had this fellowship, this loving relationship where I knew he was the only one who knew how I felt. Well, I wasn't perfect at all. I wasn't perfect before. I wasn't perfect going through it. But what I discovered in that was that I was very loved, and that love became my foundation for what I would do. And so I was able to respond with patience and love because I was being loved. And that happened through prayer and the word. Like, there was no other way that I could access that. And it was this trial, it was this suffering that forced me into this loving relationship that, freed me from law, freed me from licentiousness. It was just him. It was the only focus you can say that works as a Christian life. It's just Jesus.
Shawn, how much of a change do you think we would see in the church right now if this message of grace actually was being lived out and understood in the freedom that came from that?
I think there's a epidemic of stress and worry and anxiety in the church. And I think that would be healed slowly as people realize that all the things that they're stressing about is because of self-reliance or external trials that they're trying to control. And when you connect with Jesus by his grace, the peace that passes understanding is so real. And it's what the church in America is missing, I think, for the most part. When I talk to people, it's like they're either burnt out because of stress and anxiety and relational difficulties, or they're doubling down on trying harder. That seems to be like the DNA of the church right now, or the outward manifestation of what they believe about the gospel. Now, none of this has to do with people getting saved or a justification. It all has to do with growth or sanctification. Pastors would be preaching about what Christ has done instead of what we need to do. And when our focus was on Christ, the work of the church would abound because his life would be being lived through us. But I think all our maybe strategy sessions and trying to muscle up the energy to accomplish these goals, they would decrease as people instead seek his face. And I think the largest thing that would change is people would pray, really pray together, because they would realize that it's never man that accomplishes the will of God. It's God who accomplishes the will of God as men pray. And Jesus told us to pray and to ask and to really seek his face. And I think that's what would happen, is there would be a revolution of people delighting in seeking his face.
That's so powerful. I can't even wrap my mind around it sometimes. Grace really is this endless, infinite depths. We will never exhaust the depths of grace. And yet I think you're right. We err when we start to go, yeah, I got that one figured out. I dialed that in. Now I'm going to move on to bigger and better things in my Christian walk.
I also wanted to say to that, babe, it's grace is, like you said, the depths there, it's unending. You can never plumb the depths of it. And yet exactly what your book is titled, it's so simple. And as I walk in the Christian life and walk closer with the Spirit, I just had this conversation with a dear friend of mine this morning on the phone. The way we overcomplicate these things is insane to me, and how simple the Lord has made it, how big he is, and everything that he's created it's so, the magnitude is so great, yet he made it so simple for us to understand, and we blow right past it every time. We're like, I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but it's not. Yeah. It's actually very simple. Just listen.
It's like you're skimming the book going, okay, but get to the part where what do I do? How do I do this?
I told you right in the front.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's the question. People, when I'm counseling, people always say, what do I do? And I say, that's a really interesting question, but it's the wrong question. The question is, what did Christ do?
Yes.
Yeah. There was something you had shared earlier, and I feel like the Lord is prompting me to share this. We were leading worship for an event the other night at our church. It was just like a worship evening, prayer, worship, all that kind of stuff. And in the middle of that, I stopped and I just shared this, like, all this week, we're here to listen to the voice of the Lord, but the voice that I had been hearing in my ear all week was one of accusation. It was the voice of the enemy. And all week I had been sitting there striving and fighting, trying to go argue with him, basically. And it hit me that night. I was like, you know what? The freedom actually came when I quit arguing and I just said, you're absolutely right. I am all those things and then some. But Jesus, he's the one. I'm not worried about my righteousness anymore because I have his righteousness. So he already beat all those down. I get to walk in that and receive that in faith and freedom. And back to your point about it is our own pride that gets in the way, that wants to return to our vomit, essentially. We want to, not just our sin, but actually our law, and think, you know what? I can really perfect this in the flesh, as Paul says in Galatians, like, having started in the spirit, are we now making perfect in the flesh? It's like, no, that's not how it works. We start with grace, we continue with grace, we end with grace, because anywhere along the way, if it's not about God's glory, it's not about him, and grace ultimately points to him every single time. So it's so funny how God puts these conversations, we planned this interview with you 2 months ago, I think, a month ago, something like that. And yet the timing of God and his grace has worked all of this out for us to have this conversation, and for me to experience even these things where I was like, man, the enemy is really hitting me. And nope, it's grace. It's grace. And I think if you had one more thing as we're wrapping up here, I would love for you to share some resources you mentioned earlier, some books, but also anything else that you would want to say to the audience, especially that person who's maybe like, I'm not sure I'm convinced.
Paul said that he had one strategy for it. In Acts chapter 20, he's leaving a church in Ephesus that he had just planted. And so he's literally leaving them after just a few weeks of being there and teaching them everything they needed to know. And he says, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and give you an inheritance among the saints. This grace was his only strategy for church planting, for the church. He's like, you don't need anything except God's grace. And, the enemy, like you experienced, the enemy is constantly planting seeds. Like, he's the accuser of the brethren, right? So he will go around telling you, you're a sinner, you want this, he's tempting you to do all these things. And then he's providing a lie for you to hang on to. Mm-hmm. And I think if I were to tell anyone, the one thing that will set them free more than anything else is believe the truth of what Jesus says, which is, you died on the cross. Your flesh, your sin nature has been crucified with Christ. You are not a sinner anymore. You are a saint who sometimes sins. Mm-hmm. But we only sin as Christians when we believe the lie that that's who we are, or that's what we want. But the true nature inside us is holy now. We have been made righteous. And this idea that God has already made you righteous, that we are sanctified, helps us to move down the path of sanctification. This is always the path to freedom. It's not, what are you going to do to stop sinning? It's, will you choose to believe the truth that Jesus has already set you free? Or are you going to believe the enemy's lie that that's who you are? And this is why it all becomes an identity issue. You are a child of God. You want to do his will. If you choose to participate in sin, you will be unhappy because you are a child of God. Mm-hmm. And that's the cycle that we go in. Yeah. And does it mean if you participate in sin, you won't be a child of God anymore? No. You will, like, every child stumbles and falls as they grow up. Mm-hmm. Every single one. But none of them end up a turtle. Mm-hmm. They always grow up to be people. Because if you provide a child with the proper environment, they will grow up to be a human being, because that's their nature. And I just want people to know that the work was finished on the cross when Jesus said, "It is finished." He didn't lie when he said, "You are righteous, you are holy, you are my children, and I have written my law on your mind and on your heart, and just go live your life. Allow me to live your life through you in surrender." You are free. And there's so much joy in that. And the only thing that stops us from doing it is unbelief. I really don't believe I'm free. I think God still needs to do something more with me. That's always a lie. The enemy just wants to plant these little lies, and they're always lies. And so for us, it's the truth that will set you free. And what Jesus says by his grace is always true. And that's kind of my last thing that I would like to just highlight is it's our union with Christ that sets us free completely. And does that mean you're perfect? No, it means that your nature is always to do the will of God. And we learn how to walk through our stumbling, through everything else. We learn how to walk with our Heavenly Father, but he's never disappointed in us.
That's so good. Shawn, thank you for joining us on the All of Life show today. What are some ways that folks can learn more, get a hold of your book, and learn more about your ministry too?
My website is called simplegrace.life. Simplegrace.life. Yeah. And there is a little explanation of what I do. So my goal is to travel around and do guest speaking and, if possible, conferences at churches or training of church staff. And so if anyone would like to engage with me in that, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm a missionary, just praying that God supplies my needs, and God has been faithful to do that. And so that's what I'm doing. My book is available there. It's also available on Amazon. It'll just link you over to Amazon and Audible. It's called, just look up Simple Grace and it'll be right there. I have a little podcast that I'm just trying to get started. I've been on a break like you for a little while, but I'm going to be getting that back going here in a little bit. And that's pretty much, I'm not really on social media much. And so that's my website is pretty much the way to get into contact with me. If you're, looking for resources or other authors or stuff like that, I'm full of, I've dedicated the last 25 years of my life to reading books about grace and the new covenant and discovering kind of hidden gems. So there's just tons, starting from people that everyone knows, like Andrew Murray and C.T. Studd and Norman Grubb, but George Mueller, those are guys from like the 1800s and early 1900s that really understood grace and taught it, I think, very, very well to people today. There's different guys, and you don't have to agree with everything they say, but guys like Andrew Farley and I just read a book called No Longer I by Tim Hotchkiss, just came out last year. It's a very wonderful book about grace and our life with Christ. So there's just so many wonderful books out there. So I'd happily recommend, if anyone wants to reach out to me on my website, resources, podcasts, and different ways to connect.
Excellent. Well, if you guys have been blessed like we have from Shawn, go and check out his resources, buy his book, buy the audiobook, buy them all. I think I have all three copies. I have a digital book, I have an audiobook, and I have a physical copy that Shawn sent me. But also, if there are means, or if you have the means to bless Shawn in supporting his ministry, I'm sure you can do that through his site or reaching out to him and finding out how you can contribute in that way. Again, Shawn, thank you so much for being here. We would love to have you back again. And I know this is a topic we could keep digging into more and more and more, but it is something that is very near and dear to our hearts, as our whole show is about living in grace and that all of life is lived before the face of God. So this has been the All of Life show. I'm Stewart White.
I'm Alycia White.
And thank you guys for listening. Tune in next time, and we will see you then.